Greetings and salutations, Greek students. We continue our study of the Greek language by turning to third declension nouns. We've already learned first declension and second declension nouns. You don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about how do I label these nouns properly. It's more about recognizing what they are. Now, before we begin looking at the forms of the third declension, I want to say that it's important to recognize that all the same rules for nouns that we've learned so far still apply. We're still going to talk about the case of nouns, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and what those cases do. We're still going to recognize that nouns have gender, masculine, feminine, and neuter. And we have number, singular and plural nouns. So all those rules that we've learned for nouns continue to apply in the third declension. The only difference is that the forms of these nouns are going to be slightly different. So let's get into it and take a look at what do these verbal forms look like. So with these third declension nouns, we have multiple different kinds of types. So there is a pattern, but the pattern changes significantly enough that it's really not worth memorizing a lot of endings so much as being able to recognize them when you see them. So for example, the neuter noun body, soma, an important word in the New Testament, particularly when it comes to the letters of Paul, soma, body, in the genitive plural becomes somatos. So you have that fairly longer ending, matos, mati in the dative, ma in the accusative, mata in the nominative plural, maton in the genitive plural, masi in the dative plural, and mata in the accusative plural. Now let's pause for a minute and go over to the next neuter noun that we see, res, ta, genos. So notice this os ending is not like the ma ending on soma. And it functions os, us, os, on, asin, a. Now a couple of similarities. The neuter in the nominative and in the accusative, singular as well as in the plural, is going to match. So that's going to be the case in those neuter nouns. But the other thing that you notice is that soma is one of those verbs with that ending, ma, matas, mati, ma, mata, maton, masi, mata, that is not similar in its ending to ta, genos, race. Genos, genus, gene, genos, gene, genon, genesi, gene. When you look these words up in a lexicon, what they will be listed as is not only the noun, genos, but the second position will list what is the genitive form, which will be kind of the guide, the genitive singular, for knowing how the rest of the ending of the words go. So again, I don't want you to spend a lot of time trying to memorize these endings and going, okay, which ending is which? It's more being able to recognize the patterns. So you can see that you have a regular pattern of ending with a sigma in the genitive singular, a iota in the dative singular, an alpha in the accusative singular, although not always, because here with genos in the neuter you have the repetition, and in pollen it's different, which is a feminine noun. So you always are going to see this own ending in the genitive plural, which is a consistent feature. The dative in the dative plural, masi, sarxi, arkusi, genesin, basileusin, palesin. So you have that iota in the dative singular and in the dative plural, the omega in the genitive plural, and typically the os in the genitive singular. So again, it's about recognizing these patterns and being able to see them. Another common word, also important in Paul's letters, sarx, flesh, sarx, sarkos, sarki, sarkos, sarkes, sarkon, sarxi, sarkos. And again, you're not looking to memorize like you have with on, s, a, these endings like you're used to memorizing them when it comes to verbs or in the first and second declension, where there's a pretty consistent pattern, because the verbal or the noun stem on these words is fluctuating. The noun stem dictates different kinds of endings. So it's more about being able to recognize them and seeing there is a pattern, but the pattern is sufficiently different that it's more about recognition than memorization. So ruler, archon, archontos, archonti, archonta, archontes, archonton, arkusi in the dative plural, and arkantos. So these own, ontos, onti, onta, ontes, onton, usin, arkantes endings are a feature of the third declension, which will be important for next time when we talk about participles as well. So these are the forms of the third declension. And again, the good news here is that in terms of what these nouns are doing, it's just like what we've already seen. So when we see a nominative, we're talking about the subject of a sentence. If we see a genitive, it's going to be possessive. We're going to want to translate it of somatos, a body. When we see dative, to a body, somati. The accusative is going to be the direct object, and so on and so forth, singulars and plurals. So everything that we've learned about nouns in the first and the second declension already, very beginning of this course, still applies when we're talking about third declension nouns. What's different now is that we have new ending forms. So that's the only difference. There's no syntactical or grammatical changes to what we've already learned about how nouns work. All that we're doing is adding new forms, which is confusing. But again, these are forms that are less important to be memorized in terms of how they work and more important to be recognized. So it's also really helpful to point out that knowing your definite articles will really help with these third declension nouns, because as you've probably already noticed, a lot of these sentences, Greek sentences, like to include the definite article. So if you know your definite article, even if you're a little fuzzy or a little hazy on your third declension endings, which you will be, because I'm not asking you to memorize them because it's not really the point, it will help you to know, oh, I've got the definite article nailed down. And so when I see this definite article with this noun, I can connect them. And again, the other thing, as we've already pointed out, neuter forms of the third declension have the same nominative and accusative forms. Nominative and accusative in the neuter words like soma and genos. So that's the introduction to third declension nouns. As we look at example sentences for these nouns, you'll see that they function just like what we've come to expect. It's more training yourself to recognize these new third declension endings as we add them to existing first and second declension endings. The other thing you'll notice is that unlike first and second declension, third declension nouns can be neuter, they can be feminine, they can be masculine. We do see a more consistent pattern with first and second declension being typically either feminine or masculine. There's more variation in these third declensions, so it's sort of a broader category of difference. Just something to watch out for, to be paying attention to. But again, the good news, third declension nouns function just like first and second declension nouns. So they're still nominatives are still nominatives, datives are still datives, genitives are still genitives, accusatives are still accusatives. They do all the same things that we've learned about how nouns work up until this point.